The laughter started at the moisture testing station. Not loud at first. Just quiet chuckles. Then somebody said it. What exactly is that supposed to be? Ethan Carter looked through the scale house window, toward the wagon sitting behind his truck. Inside the grain bed, the corn looked different. Darker. Smaller kernels. Deep reddish gold tones mixed with bronze instead of the bright yellow everyone expected. Behind the testing counter, Dale Harper held a handful of kernels and shook his head. You planted this on purpose? More laughter came from the coffee corner. Ethan kept his voice calm. Yes. Dale dropped the kernels back into the tray. Looks like chicken feet. The co-op manager, Grant Mercer, adjusted his glasses and studied the sample again. Ethan hated HM. Because HM usually meant bad news. Grant walked toward the testing machine, while several farmers leaned against the wall pretending not to listen. 30 seconds later the machine printed results. Grant read the sheet. Then read it again. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Slightly. Ethan noticed. What? Grant set the paper down. The protein's unusually high. Dale shrugged. So? Grant looked back at Ethan. What variety is this? Heirloom red dent. Silence. Then laughter again. Because heirloom anything sounded ridiculous to most farmers in Iowa in 1992. Why the hell would you plant heirloom corn? Rick Harlow asked from beside the coffee machine. Ethan folded his arms. Flavor. That nearly killed the room. Dale bent over laughing. Flavor? You farming or opening a restaurant? Even Grant smiled slightly. Because commodity farming worked one way. Bushels. Yield. Efficiency. Volume. Nobody talked about flavor. Flavor belonged to tomatoes and apples and things sold beside homemade jam. Not corn. Definitely not field corn. But Ethan wasn't chasing commodity markets. And that was exactly why people thought he'd lost his mind. The previous 3 years had nearly buried him financially. Fertilizer costs rose. Fuel climbed. Corn prices sagged. Worse, the Carter farm sat on lighter soil than surrounding operations. Good years felt average. Bad years felt catastrophic. Competing on volume against larger operations felt like racing tractors against freight trains. Ethan figured something out slowly. Small farms lost when they played the same game as giant farms. Winning required different rules. The idea started during a county fair 2 years earlier. An old agricultural historian ran a small exhibit showing forgotten corn varieties once grown across the Midwest before hybrid systems dominated everything. Blue corn, red corn, white varieties. Strange names Ethan barely remembered. Most people walked past. Ethan stayed an hour. One sentence from the historian stuck in his head afterward. Modern farming optimized yield and forgot personality. At the time, Ethan thought it sounded strange. Then he started reading. Some older varieties carried different starch characteristics, different sugar profiles, different aromas. Small specialty markets already paid premiums quietly for unusual grains. Most farmers never noticed because they weren't looking. Now standing inside the co-op, while neighbors laughed at his wagon load of bronze-red kernels. Ethan wondered briefly whether he'd made a horrible mistake. Grant slid the testing paper across the counter. Protein's impressive. Dale snorted. Can you pay bills with protein? Grant shrugged. No. Then looked back at Ethan. But nobody around here buys this. There it was. The problem. Not quality. Market. Ethan loaded back into his truck 30 minutes later, carrying exactly what he feared. No buyer. 300 acres of strange corn nobody wanted. Dale followed him outside. You still got time. Ethan looked over. For what? Plant normal stuff next year. Ethan stared through the windshield silently. Maybe Dale was right. Maybe he'd spent an entire season growing expensive birdseed. Maybe uniqueness only sounded smart in books. The first week after harvest felt awful. Elevators offered terrible pricing. Feed buyers barely cared. Some outright refused. The red corn sat in storage bins while Ethan watched bills stack across the kitchen table. One evening his sister Sarah found him staring at invoices. You okay? Ethan leaned back. Not really. She glanced through paperwork. How bad? He looked toward the bins outside, visible through the kitchen window. Depends whether somebody buys corn nobody understands. Sarah frowned. What makes it different? Ethan shrugged. Supposedly better flavor. She stared. You grew 300 acres because supposedly? That sounds worse when you say it out loud. She laughed softly. But neither of them felt relaxed. November arrived. Then December. Still nothing. The co-op jokes got worse. People called it Ethan's fancy corn. Others called it museum grain. At the feed store, Dale announced dramatically, Anybody need decorative harvest supplies? Rick nearly spilled coffee laughing. Ethan ignored them mostly. Mostly. Then one freezing Thursday in January, the phone rang. Sarah answered first, then looked confused. Somebody from Kentucky. Ethan frowned. Kentucky. She handed him the phone. Hello. A voice answered immediately. Mr. Carter? Yes. My name's Henry Lawson. Pause. I own Lawson Ridge Distilling. Ethan blinked. Distilling? Yes. Long silence. Then, I heard you might have heirloom red dent corn. Ethan sat up slowly. How? Agricultural contacts. Henry paused. Do you still have it? Ethan looked out the kitchen window, toward the grain bins standing beneath fresh snow. Yes. Another pause. Then Henry asked a question nobody else had asked all year. Can I come taste it? Ethan frowned. Taste it? Yes. Long silence followed. Because after 6 months of laughter and rejection, nobody had once asked about taste. 3 days later, a black pickup truck rolled into the Carter driveway carrying a man in a heavy coat and polished boots. Henry Lawson climbed out carrying nothing but a notebook. No paperwork. No contracts. Just a notebook. Dale Harper watched from across the road while pretending to repair fence wire very badly. Henry spent 2 hours examining grain samples, smelling kernels, chewing them, asking questions about soil and weather conditions. Finally, he stood beside the storage bin looking almost excited. You know what this tastes like? Ethan stared at him. No. Henry smiled slowly. Money. Then he asked one final question. How much do you have? Ethan thought he misunderstood the question. How much what? Henry Lawson looked at him like the answer should have been obvious. Corn. Ethan blinked. All of it. Henry nodded. Yes. Silence sat between them. Cold January wind rolled across the yard while snow moved along the fence lines in thin white ribbons. Across the road, Dale Harper had completely abandoned pretending to repair fencing. He was openly staring now. Ethan folded his arms slowly. You want all 300 acres? Henry smiled. Depends. On what? Henry picked up another handful of red kernels from a sample bucket and rolled them between his fingers. Consistency. That word mattered. Because every elevator in Iowa cared about bushels. Henry cared about repeatability. Flavor. Protein. Characteristics. Things Ethan had spent a year hearing nobody wanted. Inside the kitchen, Henry sat at the table with samples spread around him while Sarah poured coffee. He chewed another kernel thoughtfully. The starch profile's different. Ethan stared. The what? Henry smiled. Different grains ferment differently. He tapped the sample. Most large distilleries want efficiency. Then he tapped the red corn again. We want identity. Sarah frowned. What does that mean? Henry looked out toward the storage bins. It means people remember flavor. He explained it slowly after that. Large commercial operations often blended grain from everywhere. Thousands of acres. Uniform. Predictable. Good for volume. But smaller distilleries increasingly search for grain with unique characteristics, because unique grain created distinct spirits. And distinct products created loyal customers. Ethan sat quietly listening. Because for almost a year, everyone treated the corn like a mistake. Now this man talked about it like treasure. Finally, Ethan asked the question sitting in his head. What are you offering? Henry named the number. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee cup. Ethan actually thought he heard wrong. Because the offer sat far above commodity pricing. Not slightly. Wildly. Enough to clear lingering debt. Enough to repair machinery. Enough to breathe again. Henry saw Ethan's expression and laughed. That shocked you? A little. Henry shrugged. Commodity buyers purchase corn. He pointed toward the bins. We purchase ingredients. That difference changed everything. 3 weeks later, semi-trucks from Lawson Ridge Distilling rolled onto the Carter farm. People noticed immediately. Small towns always notice unfamiliar trucks. Especially expensive ones. Especially when they stop repeatedly at the same farm. Dale Harper nearly drove into a drainage ditch seeing the first trailer load out. He pulled into the yard before Ethan even finished paperwork. What the hell is happening? Ethan signed another receipt calmly. Selling corn. Dale pointed wildly toward the trucks. Who pays this much for corn? Ethan looked toward the departing trailer. Apparently whiskey people. That sentence spread across Mason County like wildfire. Nobody believed it initially. Then they saw more trucks. Then more. By spring, rumors became facts. Lawson Ridge signed a supply agreement guaranteeing purchases for future harvests if quality stayed consistent. Not yearly maybe. Guaranteed. That changed the tone around town almost overnight. The same farmers who mocked fancy corn suddenly asked cautious questions. What variety was that again? You keeping seed? Mind if I see your planting notes? Rick Harlow arrived one afternoon pretending curiosity. I'm not saying I want to grow it. Ethan leaned against the truck. Okay. I'm just asking questions. Okay. Rick frowned. You enjoying this too much? Yes. Very much. The next growing season looked different. Ethan paid closer attention than ever. Field notes expanded. Moisture records. Weather patterns. Planting dates. Everything. Because now people depended on consistency. Not just him. Lawson Ridge sent representatives twice during summer. Not to inspect. To learn. Henry visited personally during July and walked the fields beneath brutal heat. He pulled ears open carefully and smiled. You know something funny? Ethan looked over. What? People think distilling starts in barrels. He looked across the rows. It starts here. That stayed with Ethan afterward. Because nobody at the co-op had looked at the corn as anything except grain. Henry looked at it as the beginning of something. Harvest arrived again in autumn. And this time nobody laughed at the red corn. Nobody. Instead, trucks slowed constantly near the fields. Farmers watched combines move through rows of bronze-red kernels beneath golden sunlight. Even Dale stopped pretending skepticism. One evening he stood beside Ethan watching grain pour into waiting trailers. You know what bothers me? He asked. What? I held this stuff in my hand. Ethan looked over. At the co-op. Dale stared toward the combines. I remember laughing. Ethan smiled faintly. Yes. Dale shook his head slowly. And now whiskey people are driving halfway across the country for it. Wind moved softly across harvested fields. The setting sun painted everything orange and gold. I still don't understand it, Dale admitted. Ethan looked toward the trailers lined beside the bins. Neither do I completely. Dale frowned. Then why plant it? Ethan thought about the fair exhibit. The old historian. The months of rejection. Henry chewing kernels in his kitchen. Then he answered honestly. Because competing with everybody else wasn't working. Dale stared silently. Because deep down, he understood that too. By 1995, 3 more farms in Mason County experimented with specialty grains. Different varieties. Different markets. Some failed. Some worked. But people started thinking differently. That mattered. Lawson Ridge never missed a harvest after that. Every season the black trucks returned. Every season Henry walked the fields himself. And every season the co-op jokes disappeared a little further into memory. One cold evening years later, Dale stood beside Ethan near the same scale house where the laughter started. You know, he said quietly, they called your corn junk. Ethan looked across the bins glowing beneath sunset light. Yeah, Dale smiled. Turns out they just had the wrong customer. For months the co-op saw Ethan Carter's strange red corn as a mistake. Too different. Too unusual. Too hard to sell. Then one distillery owner asked a question nobody else thought to ask. How does it taste? And after that, the trucks kept coming back every harvest.